My name is Chris, and I'm 55 years old. 24 years ago, my wife walked out on us when my son David was just 3, leaving me to raise him alone. Last month, I spent $35,000 on David's wedding money I borrowed against my retirement and took out loans for. I thought it would be the happiest day of my life, watching my boy marry the woman he loved. But then I heard him tell his new wife that I was just a guest at his wedding. Just a guest. Those 3 words shattered everything I thought I knew about our relationship. Before I tell you exactly what happened that day and how those words changed everything between us forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will show you how sometimes the people closest to us can hurt us the deepest, and how I finally found the strength to walk away from the son I raised with my own 2 hands. When Amanda left us in the spring of 2000, David was barely out of diapers. She packed her bags while I was at work, left the divorce papers on the kitchen table, and disappeared with some guy she'd been seeing behind my back. No phone call, no explanation, no forwarding address. Just gone, like we never mattered at all. I was working the night shift at the GM plant in Detroit back then, assembling parts on the line from 11 af to 7 am. It was tough work, but it meant I could be home during the day to take care of David. Those early years nearly broke me. I'd come home exhausted, grab maybe 3 hours of sleep, then wake up to make breakfast and get David ready for daycare. I remember the first time he got sick with a fever. I had no idea what to do. Called my mother at 2 in the morning, panicking because his temperature hit 102 degrees. She talked me through giving him children's Tylenol and putting a cool cloth on his forehead. I sat up all night watching him sleep, terrified something would happen to him on my watch. Learning to cook was another adventure entirely. Before Amanda left, I could barely make scrambled eggs. YouTube became my cooking teacher. I watched endless videos on how to make mac and cheese, chicken nuggets, and peanut butter sandwiches. David was patient with my early disasters. He'd eat my burned grilled cheese with a smile and say, "It's good, Daddy." Those words kept me going through the hardest times. Every morning, I'd drive him to Little Sprouts daycare in my beat-up Ford pickup. He'd wave goodbye from the window, his little hand pressed against the glass. Every evening, I'd pick him up, and he'd run into my arms like I'd been gone for months instead of hours. I turned down every date invitation that came my way. My co-workers would invite me to happy hour on Friday nights, trying to set me up with their sisters or friends. "Chris, you need to get back out there," they'd say. But David was my world, my only priority. Every weekend was ours. We'd go to Belle Isle Park, play catch in the backyard, or drive out to Lake Huron for fishing trips. By the time David turned 8, we had our routine down perfect. Saturday mornings meant pancakes and cartoons. Sunday afternoons were for baseball practice in Roosevelt Park. He played Little League from age 6 through 12, and I never missed a game. I was the dad cheering loudest from the bleachers, the one who brought orange slices for the team. David excelled in school from the beginning. His teachers always had glowing things to say during parent conferences. "David is such a bright boy," Mrs. Patterson told me in 3rd grade. "He's reading above grade level and his math skills are exceptional." I beamed with pride, knowing that despite everything we'd been through, I was doing something right. High school brought new challenges. David played varsity baseball and maintained a 4.2 GPA. College recruiters started calling during his junior year. Michigan State offered him a partial academic scholarship, and I nearly cried when he got the acceptance letter. All those years of sacrifice, all those double shifts I worked to save money, All those nights I fell asleep at the kitchen table, helping him with homework, had paid off. The day I dropped him off at college in East Lansing, he hugged me tight and said, "Dad, you're my hero. Thank you for everything." I drove home alone that night with tears streaming down my face, but they were tears of joy and accomplishment. I had raised a good man, a smart man, a man who would make something of himself in this world. David graduated from Michigan State in May of 2018 with a degree in finance. He landed a job at an investment firm in Chicago just 3 months later. For the first time since Amanda left, I felt like I could finally breathe. My boy was launched, successful, and making his own way in the world. That June, David called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice bubbling with excitement. "Dad, I met someone. Her name is Sarah, and she's incredible. I think you're really going to like her." The happiness in his voice made my heart soar. After years of watching him focus solely on school and work, it felt wonderful to hear him talk about love. "Tell me about her," I said, settling into my recliner with a beer. "She works at the same firm as me in marketing. She went to Northwestern, graduated summa cum laude. She's smart, beautiful, and she laughs at my jokes. Dad, I think she might be the one." We talked for over an hour that night. David described their first date at some fancy restaurant in downtown Chicago, how they'd walked along the lakefront afterward, how she'd impressed him with her knowledge of art and literature. I hadn't heard him this animated about anything since his high school baseball championship. "When do I get to meet this Sarah?" I asked. "Soon, Dad. Real soon. Maybe she can come with me next time I visit." That visit came in August. I spent the entire week beforehand cleaning the house from top to bottom, repainting the guest bedroom and planning the perfect dinner menu. I wanted everything to be perfect for David's first serious girlfriend. When they arrived on a Saturday afternoon, my first impression of Sarah was that she was absolutely stunning. Tall blonde, with the kind of polished look that spoke of expensive clothes and professional styling. She wore a white sundress that probably cost more than I made in a week, and carried a designer purse I'd seen in magazine advertisements. "Sarah, this is my dad, Chris." David set his arm around her waist. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Johnson," she said, extending a manicured hand for a brief handshake. Her smile seemed practiced, like something she'd perfected for business meetings. "Please call me Chris. Any friend of David's is family here." "Thank you," she replied, but her eyes were already scanning the living room, taking in my second-hand furniture and the faded carpet I'd been meaning to replace for 3 years. During dinner, I tried my best to make conversation. I asked about her work, her family, her interests. She answered politely but briefly, like she was checking boxes on a list, rather than engaging in genuine conversation. "My father is a corporate attorney in Hartford," she mentioned when I asked about her family. "My mother is a pediatric surgeon. They've been very successful in their respective fields." "That's impressive," I said. "David tells me you went to Northwestern. That's a top-notch school." "Yes, I was fortunate to receive an excellent education. My parents always emphasized the importance of academic achievement and professional development." Everything she said felt formal, distant. When David talked, she'd smile and touch his arm. But when I spoke, her attention seemed to drift toward her phone or out the window. After dinner, they went for a walk around the neighborhood. I watched from the kitchen window as David pointed out places from his childhood, the house where his best friend Tommy used to live, the corner where he'd learned to ride a bike, the small park where we'd practiced baseball for hours. Sarah nodded politely, but didn't seem particularly interested in these stories that meant everything to my son. That night, after they'd gone to their hotel, David called to thank me for dinner. "Sarah really enjoyed meeting you, Dad." "She seems nice," I said. though something felt off. Very accomplished. Yeah, she is. Her family has done really well for themselves. Her dad's law firm represents some major corporations, and her mom just opened a new practice. They live in this amazing house in Connecticut. I heard something in David's voice I'd never heard before, a kind of wistfulness, like he was comparing their life to ours and finding us lacking. Over the following months, David's visits home became less frequent. When I asked if Sarah would be coming with him for Thanksgiving, he made excuses. She's got family obligations, Dad. You understand. Christmas came and went the same way. I sent Sarah a thoughtful gift, a beautiful scarf I'd picked out at Macy's, along with a heartfelt card welcoming her to our family. Her thank you note arrived 3 weeks later, typed on expensive stationery. Dear Mr. Johnson, thank you for the lovely scarf. Best regards, Sarah. No warmth, no personality, just politeness that felt colder than silence. I started noticing other changes in David during our phone calls. He talked about expensive restaurants. Sarah wanted to try weekend trips to wine country Broadway shows in New York. When I mentioned maybe visiting them in Chicago, he'd deflect. Things are really busy right now, Dad. Maybe in a few months. But those few months never seemed to come. I began to feel like I was losing my son to a world I didn't understand, a world where I didn't belong. The call came on a cold Tuesday in December of 2021. I was getting ready for my shift at the plant when my phone rang. Dad, I have some news. David's voice carried a mixture of excitement and nervousness that I recognized from when he was little and had something important to tell me. What's going on, son? Sarah and I are getting married. I proposed last weekend, and she said yes. My heart leaped with joy. Despite my reservations about Sarah, this was my boy taking the next big step in his life. David, that's wonderful news. Congratulations. When's the big day? We're thinking September of next year. Sarah has very specific ideas about what she wants. Of course she does. Every bride has dreams about her perfect wedding. Have you two started making plans yet? Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Sarah found this amazing resort in Napa Valley. It's exactly what she's been dreaming about since she was little. The only thing is, it's pretty expensive. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, and suddenly I understood why he'd called. How expensive are we talking, David? The venue, catering, flowers, photography, everything included comes to about $45,000. Sarah's parents are contributing $15,000, but that leaves $30,000 that we need to cover. $30,000. That was more than half my annual salary. My mind raced calculating my savings account, my retirement fund, what I could possibly borrow against. But this was David's wedding, his happiness, his future. Son, don't worry about it. This is your big day. I'll cover whatever you need. Dad, are you sure? That's a lot of money. David, I've been saving for your future since you were 3 years old. If I can't spend it on your wedding, what's the point of having it? The relief in his voice was palpable. Thank you, Dad. This means everything to Sarah and me. I promise we'll make you proud. You already make me proud every day, son. But after I hung up, the reality of what I'd just committed to hit me hard. My savings account had $12,000. I'd need to borrow against my 401k and take out a personal loan from the bank to cover the rest. At 53 years old, I'd be starting over financially. But this was David's happiness we were talking about. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork and financial planning. I met with my bank manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd helped me with David's college loans years earlier. Mr. Johnson, are you sure about this? Taking out this much debt at your age could impact your retirement significantly. Mrs. Rodriguez Y raised that boy alone from the time he was 3. If I can't help him start his marriage right, what kind of father am I? She processed the loan application with a sympathetic smile. When I called David to tell him the money was secured, he simply said, "Thanks, Dad," and hung up quickly, saying he had another call coming in. No lengthy conversation about how grateful he was. No acknowledgement of the sacrifice I was making. Just a quick thanks and goodbye. Spring arrived, and the wedding planning kicked into high gear. But somehow I found myself on the outside looking in. When I asked about the tasting menu at the venue, David told me it was just for the bride and groom. When I offered to help with flower arrangements, he said Sarah's mother had already handled everything. "What about the rehearsal dinner?" I asked during one of our increasingly brief phone calls. "I'd love to host something for the family." Actually, Dad Sarah's parents already booked a private dining room at the resort. It's going to be intimate, just immediate family. Immediate family. The phrase stung more than I wanted to admit. After raising David alone for 24 years, apparently I wasn't immediate enough. In June, I asked about the bachelor party. Surely I'd be included in that tradition. "It's just going to be a few close friends from work, Dad. Nothing fancy, just dinner and drinks in Chicago. You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it is. I didn't know how the man who'd raised him, sacrificed everything for him, and paid for his wedding, had become someone who wasn't close enough to be included in his bachelor party. By July, I was beginning to feel like a stranger in my own son's life. When I asked about my role in the wedding ceremony itself, David's answer broke my heart. "Dad, just enjoy being a guest. No pressure, no responsibilities. Just relax and have fun." A guest at my own son's wedding. The son I'd raised alone. The son whose college I'd helped pay for. The son whose wedding I was financing. I was going to be a guest. I swallowed my hurt and told myself that what mattered was David's happiness. If being a guest was what he wanted, then that's what I'd be. But late at night, lying in bed in the house where I'd raised him, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow failed as a father. How had the boy who used to call me his hero grown into a man who saw me as just another guest at his wedding? September 15th, 2022, arrived with the kind of perfect California sunshine that wedding dreams are made of. I'd flown into San Francisco the night before, rented a car, and driven to Napa Valley alone. The resort Sarah had chosen was everything she'd described: rolling vineyards, elegant stone buildings, and an atmosphere of understated luxury that whispered of old money and refined taste. While the wedding party and immediate family stayed at the resort itself, I'd booked a room at a Holiday Inn about 30 minutes away. It seemed fitting somehow. Even in my accommodations, I was on the outside. The morning of the wedding, I called David's room at the resort to wish him well. His voice sounded rushed, distracted. "Hey, Dad, thanks for calling. Listen, I'm really busy right now, getting ready and everything. I'll see you at the ceremony." "Okay." "Of course, son. I just wanted to tell you how proud I am of you and how much I love you." "I love you too, Dad. Gotta run." The line went dead. I stared at my phone for a long moment, remembering all the mornings I'd woken him up for school, all the pep talks before big games, all the times he'd needed his dad to tell him everything would be okay. Now, on the biggest day of his life, he was too busy for more than a 30-second conversation. I arrived at the venue at 2 o'clock, 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The staff directed me to my seat in the 4th row, behind Sarah's extended family and David's college friends. I watched as Sarah's parents were escorted to the front row, taking their place of honor as the primary family members. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd paid for $35,000 of this wedding was sitting behind people who'd contributed nothing but day to David's life. As guests continued to arrive, I noticed how seamlessly David moved through Sarah's social circle. He laughed at the right jokes, made conversation with the right people, and seemed completely at ease in this world of expensive suits and designer dresses. When had my son learned to navigate social situations I couldn't even begin to understand? At 3:30, I decided to find David and wish him luck before the ceremony began. I made my way to the groom's preparation room, an elegant suite overlooking the vineyards. As I approached the door, I could hear voices inside. I raised my hand to knock when Sarah's voice stopped me cold. "Make sure the photographer gets shots of all the important family members during the reception," she was saying. "Yeah, my dad will be there, but he's just a guest," David replied. "Focus on your parents and our college friends. They're the ones who matter for our social media and future networking." My hand froze inches from the door. "Good," Sarah continued. "I don't want him in too many photos. He doesn't really fit our aesthetic, if you know what I mean." "I know," David said, and I could hear him moving around the room. "It's complicated. He paid for a lot of this, but you know how it is. Sometimes you have to manage family expectations." Manage family expectations. 24 years of raising him, and I had become a family expectation to be managed. I stood there in the hallway, feeling like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart until it stopped beating. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, the teenager I'd driven to baseball practice every weekend, the young man I'd helped through college was in that room discussing me like I was an embarrassing relative they had to tolerate. Just a guest. Those 3 words echoed in my mind as I walked back to my seat. He'd reduced everything I'd done for him, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd given him, to being just a guest at his wedding. The ceremony began at 4 o'clock exactly. Sarah looked radiant in a dress that cost more than my monthly salary. David looked handsome in his custom-tailored tuxedo, every inch the successful young executive. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other, I tried to focus on their happiness instead of the conversation I'd overheard. But their words felt hollow to me now. How could David promise to honor his wife when he couldn't even honor the father who'd raised him? The reception was even more painful than the ceremony. I was seated at a corner table with some of David's distant work colleagues, people who knew him as little as he apparently wanted them to know me. When introductions were made, David would simply say, "This is my father," with no additional context or warmth. During the toasts, David stood up with a champagne glass in his hand and thanked everyone who made this possible. He thanked Sarah's parents for welcoming me into their family with open arms. He thanked their college friends for being such an important part of our journey together. He thanked his co-workers for their support and friendship. He never mentioned me. Not once. The man who'd paid for $35,000 of their wedding, who'd raised him alone from age 3, who'd sacrificed his own future to give David every opportunity, didn't merit a single word of acknowledgement. By 9 o'clock, I couldn't take any more. I slipped out of the reception hall without saying goodbye to anyone. Nobody noticed. I drove back to my hotel room, sat on the edge of the bed, and cried for the relationship I'd thought I had with my son, and for the man I'd raised who could treat me like a stranger. That night, staring at the ceiling of my Holiday Inn room, I made a decision that would change everything. If David wanted to treat me like just a guest in his life, then maybe it was time I stopped showing up uninvited. The week after the wedding, David called to thank me for the wedding gift I'd given them, a generous check for $5,000, on top of everything else I'd already paid for. His tone was polite but distant, like he was checking an item off a to-do list rather than talking to his father. "Thanks for the gift, Dad. Sarah and I really appreciate it." "You're welcome, son. I hope you two had a wonderful honeymoon." "We did. Fiji was incredible. Listen, I should let you go. Work's been crazy since we got back." That was it. No detailed stories about their trip, no asking how I was doing, no acknowledgement of the financial sacrifice I'd made for their wedding. Just a quick thank you and goodbye. I didn't bring up what I'd overheard at the wedding. What would be the point David had made, his feelings clear, and confronting him about it would only create drama he obviously didn't want in his new life. October brought news that should have filled me with joy. David called on a Sunday evening to tell me that Sarah was pregnant. "Dad, we wanted you to be among the first to know. Sarah's about 8 weeks along and everything looks good so far." "David, that's wonderful news. Congratulations to both of you. When's the baby due?" "May. We're really excited. Sarah's already started planning the nursery." "When can I come visit? I'd love to take Sarah out to lunch and start shopping for baby things." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Well, Dad, Sarah's been having some morning sickness, and her doctor wants her to take it easy. Maybe we should wait until after the baby's born to plan any visits." Translation: They didn't want me around during the pregnancy. "Of course, son. I understand. Just let me know if there's anything you need." "We will, Dad. Thanks for understanding." But I was beginning to understand more than David realized. I was understanding that I'd been systematically excluded from every major event in his adult life. I was understanding that the son I'd raised had grown into a man who saw his working-class father as an embarrassment to his new lifestyle. Christmas of 2022 was the loneliest holiday I'd experienced since Amanda left. I sent carefully chosen gifts to David and Sarah, a beautiful maternity necklace for her, and a book about fatherhood for him. I included heartfelt cards expressing my excitement about becoming a grandfather and my hope that we could grow closer as our family expanded. I never received so much as a thank you text. February of 2023 brought another phone call that should have been the happiest moment of my life. "Dad, she's here. Emma Rose Johnson, born at 6:22 this morning. 7 pounds 4 ounces, and absolutely perfect." "David, congratulations. How's Sarah doing?" "How are you doing? I'm so proud of you both." "Everyone's doing great. She's got Sarah's eyes and my stubborn chin. Dad, she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." My heart swelled with love for this granddaughter I'd never met. "When can I come and see her? I can drive to Chicago this weekend if that works." Another pause. Another moment where I could feel David choosing his words carefully. "Actually, Dad, Sarah thinks it's better if we wait until Emma's a little older before having visitors. You know how it is with newborns and germs and everything. Her pediatrician recommends limiting exposure for the first few months." "David, I'm not a visitor. I'm her grandfather." "I know, Dad. Of course you are. It's just, Sarah's really anxious about the whole thing. First-time mum and all that. You understand, right?" No, I didn't understand. I didn't understand how the man I'd raised could keep me away from my own granddaughter. I didn't understand how Sarah's anxiety about germs somehow only applied to me and not to her parents, who I was certain had already met baby Emma. "Sure, son. Whatever Sarah needs. Just send me some pictures when you can, okay?" "Of course, Dad. I'll send some tonight." The pictures never came. April arrived and I decided to try a different approach. I sent a text message on Emma's 2-month birthday. Just a simple, happy 2-month birthday to beautiful Emma. Love, Grandpa. No response. I called David's cell phone twice that week, and both times it went straight to voicemail. He didn't return my calls. By June, I was facing a painful truth I'd been avoiding for months. My son didn't want me in his life anymore. The wedding had been my last hurrah as David's father, and even then I'd only been tolerated rather than welcomed. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped David with homework for 13 years, and wrote him a letter. Not an email or a text, but a real letter on paper written with a pen. My hands shook as I tried to find the right words. "Dear David," I began, and then spent 3 pages pouring out my heart. I wrote about the day Amanda left, and how I'd promised myself I'd be enough for both of us. I wrote about every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd deferred, every woman I'd turned down, because being David's father was more important than being anyone's husband. I wrote about my pride in watching him graduate, my joy in seeing him succeed, and my confusion about how we'd gotten to this place where I felt like a stranger in his life. I gave you everything I had. I wrote near the end, and I thought that meant something. I thought the years we spent together, just the 2 of us against the world, had created a bond that nothing could break. I was wrong, and that's my fault for expecting more than you were able to give. I mailed the letter on a Tuesday, and emailed a copy as well, just to make sure he received it. For a week, I heard nothing. Then on the following Tuesday evening, my phone rang. "Dad, I got your letter." David's voice was tight, irritated. "I think you're being a little dramatic here. Sarah and I aren't trying to exclude you. We're just busy with the baby and work and everything. You know how it is." "No, David. I don't know how it is. I know how it was when I was raising you alone and working night shifts and somehow still managing to be present for every important moment of your life. But I don't know how it is to be so busy that you can't return your father's phone calls or acknowledge his gifts or include him in your child's life. Dad, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. Sarah and I care about you. We're just in a different phase of life now." A different phase of life. That was his explanation for cutting me out completely. No apology, no acknowledgement of how his behavior had hurt me. No promise to do better in the future. That night, I realized that the son I'd raised was gone. In his place was a man I didn't recognize, a man who'd learned to prioritize social status and his wife's approval over family loyalty and basic decency. If I was just a guest in his life, then it was time I stopped showing up uninvited. July of 2023 marked the beginning of my liberation, though I didn't see it that way at the time. It felt more like the death of everything I'd built my identity around for 24 years. I started by changing my phone number. I kept the old number active for 1 more month, just in case David tried to reach me, but he never did. When I finally cancelled the service, I felt a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. Next, I deactivated my Facebook account. I couldn't bear to accidentally see photos of Emma's first smile, first steps, or first birthday, knowing I wouldn't be part of any of those moments. Social media had become a window into a life I was no longer welcome to share. August brought David's 28th birthday. For 25 years, I'd never missed calling him on his special day. I'd wake up early sometimes at 5 in the morning, just to make sure I was the first person to wish him well. This year, my phone stayed silent. I imagine he tried calling the old number and got a disconnected message. Part of me hoped he'd be worried enough to track down my new contact information. He wasn't. Instead, I spent that day doing something I'd never done before I went to see a therapist. Dr. Elena Martinez had been recommended by my family physician when I'd mentioned feeling depressed and anxious. Her office was in a quiet professional building downtown, and the waiting room smelled like lavender and fresh coffee. "Tell me about yourself, Chris," she said during our first session. "I don't know who I am anymore," I admitted. "For 24 years I was David's dad. That was my identity, my purpose, my everything. Now I don't know what I'm supposed to be." Over the following weeks, Dr. Martinez helped me understand concepts I'd never considered before. She talked about codependency, about how I'd made David's happiness more important than my own emotional health. She explained how my devotion, while admirable, had been enabling rather than empowering. "You taught David that your needs don't matter," she said during one particularly difficult session. "You showed him that he could take and take and take without ever having to give anything back. That's not his fault, Chris. That's a pattern you established when he was very young." The insight was painful, but liberating. For the first time, I began to understand that I wasn't the victim of David's ingratitude. I was a participant in a dysfunctional relationship I'd helped create. September arrived with a job offer that felt like divine intervention. Denver General Hospital was looking for an experienced maintenance supervisor, and my years at the auto plant had given me exactly the skills they needed. The salary was 15% higher than what I was making in Michigan and Colorado, offered mountains, fresh air, and a chance to start over. I accepted the position without hesitation. Selling the house was harder than I'd expected. Every room held memories of raising David. His bedroom, which I'd kept exactly as he'd left it for college, felt like a museum to a relationship that no longer existed. I packed up his high school trophies, his childhood drawings, and all the Father's Day cards he'd made me over the years. Some memories were too precious to abandon, even if the person who'd created them had abandoned me. I didn't leave a forwarding address with the neighbors. If David wanted to find me, he'd have to work for it. October in Colorado was spectacular. The aspen trees were turning golden, and the Rocky Mountains provided a backdrop that made every sunrise feel like a promise of new possibilities. I rented a small apartment in Lakewood, bought a used Jeep, and joined a hiking group for people over 50. For the first time in my adult life, I was making decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what David needed. November brought the first sign that David had noticed my absence. Mrs. Peterson, my former next-door neighbor in Michigan, called to tell me that a young man matching David's description had been asking questions about where I'd gone. "He seemed really worried, Chris. Said he'd been trying to reach you for weeks. I told him you'd moved but didn't know where." "Thank you for calling, Mrs. Peterson. I appreciate you not giving him any information. Are you sure about this, honey? He's your son. He's a grown man who made his choices. Now I'm making mine." December was when David's search became more serious. My former supervisor at the GM plant called to warn me that someone claiming to be my son had been asking for my contact information. I didn't give him anything, Chris, but he seemed desperate, said it was a family emergency. "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, Tom. Thanks for protecting my privacy." By Christmas, I'd established a new routine that had nothing to do with waiting by the phone for calls that wouldn't come or shopping for gifts that wouldn't be appreciated. I volunteered at the Denver Rescue Mission, serving meals to homeless families. I spent Christmas Day helping kids open donated presents, and for the first time in months, I felt useful and appreciated. 3 days after Christmas, I came home from a hike to find David's rental car parked outside my apartment building. He was sitting on the steps leading to the main entrance, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. When he saw me approaching, he stood up quickly, his face a mixture of relief and desperation. The confrontation I'd been dreading and anticipating for months was finally here. "Dad." David's voice cracked slightly as he said the word, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to run to me when he was scared or hurt. "I've been looking for you everywhere. Why did you disappear? Why didn't you tell me you were moving?" I stopped about 10 feet away from him, close enough to see the exhaustion in his eyes, but far enough to maintain my emotional distance. "I thought you made it clear that I was just a guest in your life, David. Guests don't typically leave forwarding addresses." The color drained from his face as he realized I'd heard his conversation with Sarah on the wedding day. "Dad, you heard that I was nervous. I didn't mean it the way it sounded." 24 years, David." My voice was steady, calmer than I'd expected it to be. "I gave you 24 years of my life. Every decision I made, every sacrifice I endured, every dream I postponed was for you. And in one conversation you reduced all of that to being managed like an embarrassing family obligation." "Dad, please, can we go inside and talk about this? I drove all the way from Chicago to find you. You drove all the way from Chicago because you finally realized there might be consequences for treating people badly. But some bells can't be unrung, son." I walked past him toward the building entrance, and he followed me. In my small apartment, surrounded by furniture he'd never seen, and photographs from hikes he'd never taken with me, David looked completely out of place. This was my space, my life, my world that existed without him. "I know I messed up," he began, sitting on the edge of my couch like he might need to run at any moment. "Sarah, she changed me. Her family, their lifestyle, their expectations. I got caught up in trying to fit into their world, and I lost sight of what really mattered." "No, David. Sarah didn't change you. She just revealed who you chose to become. She might have influenced your decisions, but she didn't force you to exclude me from Emma's birth. She didn't make you ignore my phone calls or fail to acknowledge my wedding gift. Those were your choices." He started crying, then real tears that reminded me of the times I'd comforted him through childhood disappointments. "I know, Dad. I know I hurt you. But Emma needs her grandfather. She needs you in her life. Emma has grandparents, David. The ones who fit your aesthetic remember the ones Sarah's comfortable having around. I'll divorce Sarah if I have to." The desperation in his voice was painful to hear. "I'll choose you over her. I'll make it right. It's too late for ultimatums, son. You already chose. And more importantly, you chose for the wrong reasons. You didn't choose Sarah because you loved her or because she made you a better man. You chose her because she came with a lifestyle you wanted and parents who impressed you. Now you want to unchoose her because you're finally facing consequences you don't like." I walked to the window that overlooked the mountains and took a deep breath of the clean Colorado air. I spent 6 months in therapy learning about myself, David. Learning that I'd enabled your selfishness by always putting your needs first. Learning that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just enabling. "What are you saying, Dad?" I turned back to face him. This man I'd raised who'd somehow become a stranger. "I'm saying I've learned to value myself. I have friends now who appreciate my company. I volunteer at places where people are grateful for my help. I wake up every morning and make decisions based on what I want to do, not what someone else needs from me." "But I love you, Dad. You're my hero, remember?" The words that had once meant everything to me now felt hollow and manipulative. Heroes don't let their children treat them like inconvenient guests at their own celebrations, David. Heroes have enough self-respect to walk away from people who don't value them, even when those people happen to share their DNA. He tried several more approaches over the next 2 hours. He promised to call more often, to visit regularly, to include me in Emma's life. He showed me pictures of her on his phone, a beautiful little girl with Sarah's blonde hair and David's stubborn chin. For a moment, my grandfather's heart nearly overruled my common sense. But then I remembered the months of silence, the ignored gifts, the unreturned phone calls, the wedding where I was treated like a stranger who'd happened to pay the bill. David, if you'd treated any friend the way you've treated me over the past year, that friendship would be over. The fact that I'm your father doesn't give you permission to use me and discard me whenever it's convenient. As the sun set over the Colorado Rockies, painting my apartment in golden light, David finally accepted that I wasn't going to fold. He wasn't going to be able to cry or promise or manipulate his way back into a relationship he'd destroyed through months of neglect and disrespect. What happens now, Dad? Now you go back to Chicago and build the life you chose. You raise Emma with the grandparents you prefer. You continue being the man Sarah wants you to be. And I continue building a life that doesn't revolve around waiting for scraps of attention from someone who's already decided I don't matter. He left just after 8 o'clock, driving back toward the airport with tears in his eyes and no resolution to ease his guilt. I watched his rental car disappear into the distance and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. 6 months later, I received a birth announcement in the mail. David and Sarah had welcomed a son, James David Johnson. There was no personal note, no invitation to visit, just a formal announcement that I was apparently still on their mailing list. I threw it away without reading the details. That evening, I called my hiking group to confirm our weekend trip to Rocky Mountain National Park. Barbara, a retired teacher, whose own children lived across the country and rarely called, had become a close friend. We'd both learned that family isn't just about blood, it's about the people who choose to show up consistently in your life. Today, I sleep well at night. I wake up excited about my day, instead of anxious about phone calls that won't come. I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone the consequences of losing you. I raised a son who became successful, wealthy, and respected in his professional circle. But I failed to raise a man who understood the difference between achieving success and being a good person. That's a lesson David will have to learn on his own, now because I'm no longer available to clean up the messes his character flaws create. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living for myself instead of for someone else's approval. And you know what? It feels pretty damn good. Sometimes you have to lose someone to save yourself. And sometimes that someone happens to be the person you loved most in the world. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship where you give everything and receive nothing in return, I want you to know that walking away isn't giving up on love. It's finally learning to love yourself enough to demand better. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you loved, even when it meant losing them? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about the difficult choices we all face in relationships. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're worth more than being someone's convenient guest. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that your peace of mind is worth more than anyone's approval, even family. Until next time, take care of yourselves and don't be afraid to choose your own happiness.